Hello and welcome to Give and Toke, the show that elevates the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. I'm your host, Paul O'Donoghue, and today I'm joined by Julian Stefanou, founding partner of West Coast Palms, an Australian medicinal cannabis producer and importer operating at a really interesting intersection of medicine, responsibility, and long-term thinking. West Coast Palms has an established footprint here in Australia, but Julian and his team are also looking outward, expanding into international markets like the Netherlands, Thailand, and Spain. That global outlook is grounded in a belief that cannabis is maturing, that legalization in some form is inevitable, and that how we build this industry now really matters. If you like what you hear on the show, be sure to follow us on Instagram at GiveandToke, check out our website giveandtoke.com.au, or email us at giveandtoke@gmail.com. Julian Stefanou, welcome to the show.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to it.
It's really nice to have you here. Now, as we've been discussing and getting ready for this pod, you've been going through some pretty legit tattoo work. How is the tattoo recovering now?
Yeah, all fully healed now, but I've still got another 3 or 4 sessions on that arm, so it's a long process to go.
It's not a visual podcast, but you do have quite a few tattoos there, so I'm sure that you're accustomed to the pain by now to an extent.
Yeah, I am, especially because the current sleeve I'm doing is overtaking another one. Or overlapping, sorry.
That's all the rage. I'm seeing all, the emo kids that I grew up with covering up their tattoos with big badass black coverings and things like that. Is that a similar vibe what's going on? There's some teen angst there being covered up?
Yeah, pretty much all things I got when I was 17 and 18, just dumb stuff now that I want covered up, and unfortunately I got to go pretty dark to do it, but that's the fad, so I don't mind.
Right on, man. Well, Julian, for listeners who may not know West Coast Palms, can you give us a bit of an overview of who you are, what you do, and why you started the company?
Yeah, so we're a fairly new player in the industry. We only launched in November 24, but in that time, I feel like we've become one of the most trusted brands in Australia for consistent quality, freshness, and bringing in pretty unique genetics. Our goal is to work with artisan growers around the world to showcase how products come differently from different countries. So originally we started off with Canada. Now we've teamed up with some growers in Thailand and obviously Australia.
So we were connected by Sasha from Golden Days, shout out, friend of the show, great dude. And you've recently partnered with them, without advertising the products too heavily or at all, Mr. TGA, if you're listening. Tell me about that relationship. How did that come to be, and what are you hoping to achieve from that?
Look, as I mentioned, we really wanted to start showcasing products from around the world, and a big focus with products in Australia. Sentiment towards Australian grown products in the market isn't great at the moment. Most people point towards Canadian products being the most primo, and then Thailand products are quite cheap, so Australian products can't compete with that. So there's a hole in the market that isn't being filled by Australian products. So I thought I want to start showcasing all these artisan growers that are growing here domestically. And after speaking with some growers and touring the Golden Days facility and spending some time with them and having a look at some of their products, I knew these were one of the crew I wanted to bring to everyone's attention first.
Yeah, what I love about what Golden Days are doing is, it's that desire for greatness. It's the desire to do something well. And I think a lot of people have different feelings about the Australian grown thing. There's lots of voices. There's people who are kind of yelling from the rooftops about what Australian grown needs. There are other people who are just getting in and doing the work. And then there's people doing both and everything in between. What is your take on the state of Australian grow? Like, I think you've kind of already answered the question in partnering with Golden Days, but what are you expecting from the Australian market to be able to compete with these international players?
Look, I think at first we had a lot of bigger companies opening up massive manufacturing facilities here at first, and their product is what has ruined a lot of the sentiment towards Australian grown products. And now regulations and licensing have eased up a bit. We're starting to see more boutique people moving into growing, like the boys from Golden Days who came from a background of distilling wine and gins. And that, I think, gives a bit more love behind the plan. And now we're starting to see a bit better product coming out. Up until this point, we haven't really had many craft growers or small batch growers in Australia. And I think that's what's going to uplift the standard of product here.
Yeah, I had the privilege of seeing, what Canada looked like at a federal level in 2017 and 18. And, the products that existed on that market were big, giant, mass-produced factory cannabis. And so even within kind of 6 to 9 months, Canada kind of fixed it. And I'm not going to say they got it right, but they made massive improvements. And I think there are still some people stuck on those pretty horrible Aussie flowers we saw, 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why I want to start showcasing these smaller farms to get their names out there and start, showing that the quality in Australia can be as good as Canada, can be as good as California, can be as good as Thailand. It's just about finding the right guys.
Well, you mentioned that Sasha and Ewan came from a different background with their alcohol and distilling background. You also, come from outside of the cannabis space. What made you personally connect with medicinal cannabis, and what made you want to build something in this space?
Look, I've had a passion for cannabis for a long time now. I'm a bit of a self-proclaimed connoisseur or weed nerd. This passion's taken me all around the world to experience the different cultures in different countries and on a pursuit for pretty unique cultivars with different therapeutic properties. During this time, I visited every legal market, every grey area market, and spent time living in all of these areas, getting amongst the scene and learning as much as I can. And I guess it was always inevitable that I was going to launch something in Australia. I was just waiting for the right time. And, I started to see products going from only these big conglomerate companies that were pushing low quality products coming out of Canada to, people focusing on craft quality products and people still focusing on small batch and premium flowers. And I was like, cool, I want to be part of this movement. So jumped on board. And look, it took us a long time to get our licensing and a lot of hoops. But eventually we got there.
Yeah, that can be one of the biggest pitfalls and challenges in this industry. It can be pretty easy to be lots of things in this world, but sometimes entering there and working in the cannabis space is far from easy. So, I'm glad you're here, because in our conversations before this podcast, you've spoken about the importance of that intersection between culture and medicine. Cannabis existed, well, these are my words, but cannabis existed well before the medicinal space came along. However, I'm really appreciative of what the medicinal space has done for destigmatization and, moving the cause forward. What does this intersection mean in a practical sense? What does it mean to kind of have it all, have a bit of culture, have a bit of clinic, and get that right?
I think the culture, the scene behind cannabis and the medical cannabis space are both really celebrating the same thing. And that's the effects behind this plant, whether you want to call it therapeutic properties or you want to call it just getting high. We're talking about the same goal, which is to stimulate the release of endorphins and help relieve anxieties, pain, stress, increase euphoria, or more serious side effects, or as casual as making us more sociable or making our little worries disappear. And I think realizing that there's a very fine line between these two things helps destigmatize all of it. And I think if we look at the markets like California and Canada, who started off in a medical space but quickly progressed into a recreational space, the difference between the medical market and the recreational market is not that different. And there's no difference between the consumers. They're still using it for the same reasons. They're not abusing it. And I think we'll see the same things here.
Yeah, I feel like we're at somewhat of an interesting kind of crossroads or turning point where, watching the TGA consultation unfold, for example, I noticed that the industry is looking at these kind of knee-jerk reactions on how to make cannabis more pharmaceutical leaning, how to make the AMA and the Pharmacy Guild happy, and things like that. What is your take on where we're taking cannabis as a society? Do you want to see more medicinal rigor? Do you want to see more acceptance of the culture? A bit of both? What would the kind of utopia look like for you?
It's hard to say I'd like to see more regulation, but I'd like to see a tighter regulation on some of these companies that kind of are going free for all and controlling a lot of the market. But I'd also like to see less regulation on the side of companies being able to talk with patients and transparency between product and brands and patients, because that's what actually educates patients in this field. If they don't have a chance to speak to the manufacturers or the people that are in charge of bringing these products in, they can't learn the individual nuances which give this flower its special properties or its special therapeutic benefits, because on paper, a lot of cannabis looks the same. And unfortunately, the medical industry focuses on what's on paper and mainly focuses on the cannabinoids, when there's so much more to cannabis than the cannabinoids. We have the volatiles, we have the terpenes, and I'm sure there's other things in there as well, which we're not 100% sure, which add to the entourage effect. And while I want to see the medical space progress, I want to make sure that they focus on these things that the culture focuses on quite a bit. So I guess I want to see a blend of both is a perfect utopia.
Yeah, and that would lead to my next question about, how do you personally, or how does West Coast Palms respect the plant's cultural history, but also, understand the responsibility of operating in this heavily regulated medicinal framework?
So I guess it's pretty hard right now. As I said, we're in a pretty tight regulatory field right now. But as I said, as consumers get more educated in the product themselves, they go out and they research into genetics and where those genetics came from. And then that takes them into research into volatiles, into terpenes, into, and all this stuff helps build the culture around it. Even if we're not directly doing it, by bringing in premium product and being as transparent as we can about where that product came from and being as transparent about our testing, the patients can learn about the product and learn about the history behind it, and all of this builds the culture. And in such a tight regulated framework, this is all we can do right now to build that culture and just keep working at it.
Yeah, I guess understanding and respecting that culture. On the flip side, what is it that kind of the clinicians or medical world or the regulators have taught you about cannabis that surprised you?
I guess it was the openness to learn from someone who doesn't really have a medical background. I expected to come into this industry with a lot of apprehension when speaking with doctors or pharmacists because I didn't have a background in pharmaceuticals or medicine. But I've been surprised how eager doctors have been to learn from us, and not only about our products, but the history behind it and our aspirations and goals behind the business.
It's a pretty funny like meeting of minds, to be honest. Like
It is.
you and I think no shade to either of us here. I think we fit the bill of cannabis users. Like I don't think it would be shocking for folks to look at us and go, yeah, those guys smoke a bit of weed.
Yeah.
But it's nice to walk into those environments where that's not the person that you're dealing with or speaking to, and actually get that level of respect. And I think the importance is that goes both ways. Like I have had incredible conversations with doctors who, don't use cannabis or, are only tiptoeing into it, but want to understand everything about it. So I'm always grateful for those, much like you and I on this culture side of things, quote unquote, trying to be a little bit more medicinal, a little bit more business-like. I also appreciate when it's projected back to us or mirrored back to us that those doctors and pharmacists understand the cultural side of it. It's a little bit different to the Lexapro that they're typically prescribing.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's another product out there where two minds from such opposite fields can meet and collaborate together.
It's really quite beautiful, actually. I think a lot of people often think about the negatives of that, that they have to deal with a doctor or this doctor has to deal with this stoner. But I think it's to be praised and celebrated. I think that's a nice point.
Yeah, 100%.
Where do you think culture still plays a positive role in how people understand and connect with cannabis as a medicine? Like, and this is me really linking the two here. Like, it's bringing them together.
Look, I think the culture is what helps build the standards in the industry. If there was no culture, there'd be no real education behind genetics, terpenes, and all these little things which make cannabis so great. It helps consumers learn about everything from terpenes to volatiles to the highly esteemed cultivators and global brands.
I quite like the rapid fire nature of this conversation here. Podcasts are usually such deep conversation and deep talk, but I think we're really nailing some shit here, man. So this is going well. We're on that note, we are going to take a little break to have a bit of fun with a quiz.
Yep.
So you've traveled to 59 countries, and along the way you've seen just how differently cannabis can be viewed, regulated, and understood. From places where it's quietly tolerated to countries where the penalties are still extreme, the rules change fast once you cross a border. So Julian, we're going to do a quiz that taps into your global perspectives. We're going to have a little bit of a peek at cannabis laws, cultures, and history around the world. No pressure, no trick questions, just a little trip around the globe. And so as these questions go along, feel free to, pipe in with little anecdotes and things that you've seen. There are a couple of softballs in here, so it'll just allow us to continue the conversation in a different way. So Julian, first question for around the world in cannabis laws. Which country was the first in the world to fully legalize recreational cannabis nationwide? Was it the Netherlands, Uruguay, or Canada?
It was actually Uruguay. It legalized cannabis in December 2013.
Yeah, that is correct indeed. So December 2013, becoming the first country in the world to regulate production, sale, and use at a national level. I got to admit, when that happened, I thought there would be a little bit more of a snowball effect across the world. We're 12 years beyond this now. But have you had a chance to experience Uruguay's legalization?
I have. I went over there in 2018. It was still fairly new. There wasn't much of a culture there, particularly for someone who wasn't a local. I found it pretty hard to actually get amongst the scene and learn about the local products. I found people apprehensive to really share with someone that wasn't from the country.
Right.
But I've only been there once, and that was my one foray into it.
Yeah, interesting. It's kind of funny that 5 years after legalization, it still wasn't, the ball wasn't really rolling. But I guess maybe you could look at what's going on here and kind of see the same thing. Like our medicinal cannabis didn't take off until kind of year 6 or 7, and here we are still fighting for some basics. So it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, question 2. In which country is cannabis technically illegal, but small personal use has been decriminalized for decades and openly tolerated in cafes? Is it the Netherlands, Spain, or Germany?
It's the Netherlands.
That is correct.
That is correct. And as I said, there are some softballs in here. But what I really want to know is kind of what's your take on the Netherlands? Like, for me, it used to be the holy grail of cannabis tourism destinations. And as other countries around the world have gone a little bit more progressive and liberal with it, it's kind of fallen down the bucket list. So what's been your experience with the Netherlands, and how do you feel about their version of legalization?
Look, I still feel like the Netherlands holds the crown for acceptedness and culture. There's nowhere else you can go into the world, and every 5 steps you can walk into a bar and have a smoke. Everywhere you're walking around, everyone's got red eyes. It's just so open there. Even though California and Canada probably pioneer for quality of product now, I still think the openness and the culture there overshines any of those other places. Even though we're starting to see the culture building more like that over there, it's still a different culture. And I like Amsterdam's a mix of the new age and the old world culture of cannabis all blended into one, which you don't find anywhere else still.
Yeah, I think it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Other places are doing it better and doing it right, but there's still something to be seen and experienced there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, question 3. Which country has the highest number of medicinal cannabis patients per capita? Is it Canada, Australia, or Israel?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm probably going to say Israel because their market's more established than ours and it's a lot more accessible.
That's a man who knows what he's talking about. Even the guesses are well informed. That is correct. So Israel is a global leader in medicinal cannabis and research and access, with one of the highest patient to population ratios in the world. So Israel is a fascinating place for progress in this industry, and they've got a lot to be proud of, and they've really set the tone for a lot of other places. So yeah, fascinating market there. Again, any experience with the Israel market personally?
Yeah, actually, when we first went into launching West Coast Palms, I went over a worldwide tour and I went over to a couple of facilities in Israel. Actually, the craziest facility I've seen was called Trichome Art in Israel. They had 3-level rows, which I've never seen before. So vertically integrated for 3 racks. It was crazy. Some awesome genetics, crazy looking facility, futuristic as.
This is one of the many reasons cannabis is such a hard field to compete in. Like, as everyone's just kind of figured out, double layer growing, Israel's like, nah, we've got 3 going. And even as we say this, they've probably got 4 or 5 now.
Who knows?
Right on. Okay, question 4. In which of these countries is it not legal to grow cannabis at home, even for personal use? France, Canada, or Germany?
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say Canada, because I know they have some pretty odd laws when it comes to personal consumption, personal production.
I'm going to give you a 0.5 for this one, because as I wrote it, I knew there'd be a trick. Like, I didn't mean it to be a trick question. So the correct answer is actually France, because Canada allows 4 plants and Germany allows 3. However, why I'm allowing it is because in Manitoba and Quebec, it is still illegal to home grow. And so, for example, Toba Grown, shout out to Jesse, they're still fighting 7 years later in the Supreme Court of Canada to try and get home grow. So I'm going to give you a half point for that one, because you're technically right. There are still parts of Canada where they're not as liberal as the rest of the country.
There you go. Still taught me something at least.
All right, question 5. Which Asian country became the first in the region to legalize medicinal cannabis in 2018? Was it Thailand, South Korea, or Malaysia?
I'm going to go with Thailand on this one.
That is
correct. Indeed. Many people know about Thailand's last few years of the Wild East, but it was actually 2018 when medicinal cannabis was legalized. So then we've seen full law relaxation in 2022, and then a couple of wind backs in the years since. How has, a lot of people know what's going on in Thailand. How have the changes in the laws impacted you, or have they at all?
Look, they've probably impacted us in a good way. Before the recent changes in the law, where it was like stepping back from the recreational facing market and going into more of a medicinal facing, It was the Wild West over there. You had all these companies pushing black market through licensed facilities, and then that was making it out of the country on legal exports into medical markets. Now, all these places require to get from farms with COAs and LPs. Look, why it's probably not policed 100%, it's made a lot of guys clean up their act. So it's actually worked out better for us. Product prices come up a little bit, but availability of legitimately tested product coming from proper LPs has increased substantially.
Yeah, so it's probably negatively impacted the boys' trips to Koh Samui, but it's definitely improved the state of the global market, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, you're killing it, man. We got 2 to go. Question 6. Which city is famous for private cannabis clubs operating legally under a shared consumption model? Is it Amsterdam, Barcelona, or Berlin?
That would be Barcelona, although I think there are some underground in Berlin, but not as famous as the Barcelona clubs.
That is correct.
That is correct. Barcelona's cannabis social clubs operate as private member associations existing in a legal grey zone rather than as retail shops. So what was it like when you visited Spain? Was it a little bit easier to visit the clubs as a non-local than it was in Uruguay?
Well, I actually went to the clubs for the first time in 2013. And that's when you had to be introduced by a local. Pretty much no tourists were allowed there. And funnily enough, my friend arrived there the night before and he picked up a local girl. So she introduced us to one of these clubs.
Right on.
And we were blown away because at the point we didn't even realize it was legal in Spain. It was pretty hush-hush back then. And I've gone back, every year to every second year since then. And I've watched the industry mature to the point it is today. And it's awesome. Now you have global brands opening shops there. And, it's still a real big grey area. If you're not making the right payments to the right people, the cops will run through your shop and they'll take everything. But, that's part of this industry. Everyone everywhere faces the same kind of backlash.
That's right. Yeah, there's always some kind of weird political or law enforcement based thing going on no matter where the industry is at. All
Exactly.
right, lucky last question. Which statement about Singapore's cannabis laws is correct? Possession of small amounts is decriminalized. Medical cannabis is available with a prescription. Or even consuming cannabis overseas can be punished under Singapore law.
See, even consuming cannabis overseas can be punished.
I only learnt that whilst doing the research for this pod. Like, I've always known that Singapore is not a place to be messed with drugs. But, my former doctor is a Singaporeese doctor that prescribes cannabis. And, they'd mentioned like, it can be a bit sketchy going home. It can be a bit of a worry, It's good that it says it's a doctor on my visa, or my papers, but it's better that I don't mention a doctor of what. This is absolutely wild. So I've not had the pleasure of visiting Singapore, but that is a very strange drug law to me, that you could consume cannabis elsewhere and they will still punish you.
Yeah, it's very draconian. You also have a similar thing in some of the Emirati states as well.
Yeah. So have you had any sketchy situations or any touch and go concerns as you've crossed borders into places like that?
Don't know if I should be sharing this story, but I went to Colombia last year for a wedding. I wrote to the consulate to get permission to take my cannabis. It was all good. I was transferring through Chile and I wrote to the consulate there to take my cannabis, but I never really heard back from the Chile consulate. But I was like, look, I'll risk it anyway. I've got permission from the Colombian government. In my layover in Chile, I was silly enough to go for a walk to a park and have a little bit of a medicate. And I actually got surrounded by police officers while there. But it was all good. I pulled out my medical canister and they took some photos and they were happy. And they were like, look, we have medical cannabis in Chile, but it's for Chile citizens in their houses. So please don't use it in the park. And I was like, yeah, I apologize. Sorry, I had a layover. That's probably my only ever real worry on a border.
I actually love that story, man. And the reason I love it is because I've had people on this show that have had far worse experiences with Australian police for products that were legally prescribed here in Australia with their name on the tub. So I think that's actually quite heartening that while it was a bit of a sketchy situation on paper, that is what police response should be. Like, oh, hey man, these are what the actual rules are. This is where you messed up. Don't do it again.
I know, and I was so surprised. I thought, oh man, I've ruined my trip the first day in. Haven't even made it to Colombia. I'm going to be sent home. But no, they were really open about it. They let me go. They even let me keep the medicine. They're like, no, no, it's your medicine. You take it. Just please be careful with it.
That's the
Like, oh,
way it
thank
should
you.
be.
Yeah.
There's just been a directive in the UK that police are to treat all cannabis users as patients first. So whether they've got a container with a script on it or not, treat them as someone who is using it to treat a condition. And I think that's really great progress. You know, we need to steal little ideas and bits and pieces from all over the world to get this right.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. That's the way it should be everywhere.
So before we move back to our regular programmed conversation, as we wrap the kind of cannabis around the world and your 59 country visits, is there anything else you wanted to share about the international scene?
I guess one of my favorite parts would be Jamaica as well, because their culture purely focuses on the plant being naturally grown. You know, over there, they're not a big fan of indoor grown. They're not a fan of a lot of the newer age genetics. And, you know, when I was living over there, because me coming from countries where indoor grown is seen as premium, I was still, you know, finding guys that were growing little plants on the inside. And my local friends there, they wouldn't want to touch it. They were just like, oh, no, why would you want that? It needs the sun to be natural. It needs. So I think that was probably one of the most unique things around cannabis culture I found around the world.
Yeah, well, forgive my white boy ignorance, but I mean, it's very much a religion there. It's very much a spiritual experience. So I think that kind of makes a lot of sense why they want that pure from the earth element.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right on. Well, 6.5 out of 7, absolutely nailed that quiz. We both learnt a lot, and thanks for sharing those stories.
Oh, man, loved it.
So obviously West Coast Palms has a footprint across Australia, but you are also expanding into markets like the Netherlands, Thailand, and Spain. What's driving the international focus?
Look, while our main focus is always going to be the Australian market, we have a vision to become a globally recognized brand in the cannabis scene. To do this, we obviously need to work in markets where the culture is more expressed, more open. So the idea is to start exploring the more recreational facing markets. We want to launch into California and Thailand first, and then our focus will be stepping into European markets. I'll actually probably be going over to California this year to meet up with some leading brands and producers. I won't mention any names, but we're going to partner with them and we're going to go on a pheno hunt, and we're actually going to try to cultivate our own phenotypes for the California market and see if somehow we can get those genetics back to Australia, whether it's grown locally here or getting it across to one of our Thai producers and having it grown over there. I think that's a big key move in establishing ourselves as more than just, you know, an import distributor or a medical cannabis brand. We want to be known as the Backpack Boys, the Cookies, the Jungle Boys coming from Australia. And to do that, you need to establish yourself in the markets which are more focused on the culture and not so focused on the medical facing. So I think to do that, we need to go into California and Thailand first.
Yeah, I feel like it would be quite short-sighted to not believe that, you know, that some form of legalization is coming. Have you made this like mission and desire well known enough to get criticism from the medical community or anyone in that space who thinks that you are dancing on the line too hard? Like, you may not have experienced that, and this could be a shit question if so, but has anyone criticized that desire?
Look, we've had a little bit of criticize on our branding because it's a little bit recreational facing. Particularly when we first launched, there weren't many recreational facing branding in the market, but now we're obviously seeing more and more come out. But other than that, we haven't really had much backlash. As I said before, there is a fine line between recreational and medicinal cannabis. Really, all it is a label. People are using the product for the same thing. They're using the same products. So I think a lot of people in the space do realize this. So there's not so much apprehension that we're preparing ourselves for an adult use market opposed to only being 100% medical cannabis focused.
What have the different markets around the world like taught you specifically about how cannabis is viewed? Is there anywhere that you think is kind of nailing the attitude?
Look, I think, you know, America, California is on point for the way people view cannabis, how quickly people's perspectives could change in these markets from it being a taboo stoner thing to it being an open part of life, it being a very sociable thing. Over in the States now, you're seeing more people consuming cannabis on a regular basis than they are drinking or even on a casual basis. So in California for a few years now, we've actually seen more people smoking than drinking on a casual or sociable level, which is good because, as the younger generations move into more of a clear-headed and sober lifestyle, alcohol sales are dropping at a rapid rate over the past few years. Cannabis opens a space there where you can still be sociable, you can still have a good time, without doing something regrettable, which, if I write a list of all my most regrettable moments, I can tell you now they're going to be on alcohol.
There's a great stand-up bit that floats around Instagram Reels where it's just like when you compare the things that you've done on booze versus cannabis, and it's like with booze, like I was committing straight crime, like, and it's just like, smoke some cannabis and I'll eat a bag of chips. Like,
Yeah.
that's the most offensive thing I'm going to do. And that always resonates deeply with me as someone who has found that alcohol just does not agree with me very well.
Yeah, I'm one of those people as well. I'm not a big drinker. Never been a casual drinker. It has to be a really big event for me to drink. And then still, after a few drinks, I feel lethargic. I feel a bit groggy and sick. And it's just like, I don't enjoy this.
Yeah, 100%. Well, like, we postponed a podcast on the weekend and I said to you that I was hungover. That was from 3 drinks, like dead set. It just makes me feel like crap.
Yeah.
So it's clear that you believe that legalization is inevitable and hence why you kind of want to have a foot in both fields, respect the medicinal side, but understand that, I'm going to put the words in your mouth, we should be heading towards adult use legalization. What does a mature cannabis industry look like? Whether it's those two coexisting, whether it's those two becoming the same thing, what will the industry look like to you if we kind of get this right?
Look, whether it's full legislation or just a more relaxed cannabis landscape, which mirrors the later days of the Canadian and California medical markets, where you would speak to a doctor, get your medical card, and then once you're approved, you could visit any dispensary, any shop that sold it. And, once there, you could pick your products. And there's more transparency between brand, patients, and products this way. And it allows patients to learn more about the products and get more educated in the products they're consuming. So I think Australia will never go into a full adult use market like alcohol. I think the way we would move is the later days of the California, like I just mentioned. And I think that's key. Right now, it's putting too much pressure on the medical industry. It's pushing bad practices in an industry that shouldn't have bad practices. We have companies gatekeeping. We have doctors being forced into bad prescribing habits. We even have doctors losing prescribing rights for Schedule 8s. And, all of this just affects the patients, access, product freshness, product availability. So either we're at a boiling point in the market where we either take step backwards, which is going to face huge backlash from patients who have grown accustomed to the medication, or we can lighter in the regulations and step back from it being so strict and move into more of a dispensary facing market.
Do you think it's important that the companies within the medicinal framework kind of steward us towards some version of legalization?
Yeah, I think it's important that companies in the industry are focusing not only on the medical aspect, but on the legislation aspect as well, because it helps pioneer both sides. I feel like, as I've mentioned earlier in the podcast, if we focus only on the medical side of things, we start to lose focus on a lot of these things which make cannabis unique and which make it what it is. As I've mentioned previously, the medical industry mainly focuses on cannabinoids and what's on paper. Between you and me and every cannabis user, and a lot of people who aren't even users and getting more educated in it, they know that there's so much more to it. And for these parts of the cannabis to come into light, we need to make sure that people are focusing on the culture as well as the medical side of things.
So I guess on that note, what responsibility do companies, producers, importers have as the industry expands?
I think it's just staying up to date with the industry as a whole, whether it's health studies, legislation changes, or just generally how products are changing. Cannabis 10 years ago is very different to how cannabis is now. I think if you were trying to sell cannabis 10 years ago on the market now, you get a lot of backlash for having lower quality products, all these kind of things. So staying progressive with the global market, I think, is the main responsibility.
What excites you the most about where cannabis is heading? We've obviously discussed a lot of hypotheticals here and there's utopic ideas, but what does get you up and out of bed in the morning? What gets you the most excited?
Look, I guess it's just the global recognition for cannabis not being a drug and it being something different. Being a proud cannabis consumer for a long time now, and a bit of a world traveler, I've always had to, fly to a country and then worry about finding a link there if I wanted to
Yeah.
get medicated. But, now I can just fly over to that country with my medication and it not be a worry. So I fly all around the world with my products now. I always write to a consulate first to get
Yep.
permission. But as I've said, the one place I've been denied from is USA, which is surprising.
Oh, they don't mind a hypocrite warning there, do they?
Yeah, exactly. Even flying into California couldn't take it over federal lines. So I guess it's just the fact that, I see maybe 5, 10 years from now, the openness worldwide. We're having countries like UAE and Japan looking at legislation for medical markets. UAE is huge. And, within a few years, they will have a medical market there and they'll allow patients to bring in medical cannabis. So I guess it's just the excitement for me loving this plant so much, it losing its stigma worldwide and not just in Australia, not just in California, not just in Europe.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, but I know that the biggest question I'll get from listeners is like, can I have a little bit more advice about the cannabis travel? Do you want to just give a quick little 101 about what you do to make sure you can get into a country with your cannabis?
Yeah, so I always just write to the local embassies and consulates. Generally, they won't have a clear answer for you and they'll push you on to whatever border control or customs force is in charge. And then I'll just have a chat with them. Sometimes it can take some time because they have to ask someone and they have to ask someone. And then sometimes you'll get permission through email and you're like, oh, can I have this written in a letter? They're like, well, we don't supply a letter for it. So we went into Turkey and I wanted to take my cannabis with me. And I was like, look, it seems a little sketchy going across the Turkish border with cannabis without a letter from the consulate or without a letter from the border control. They're like, no, it's allowed. Just go. You don't need a letter. Like, can you please just give me a letter?
Yes.
I don't know if your custom agency is going to be as well informed as you. You had to go research this. Is this guy going to be all right? But look, haven't had any issues, fingers crossed. But yeah, just make sure you always write to a consulate, get permission first. Don't just take, the information off the internet because it can be very outdated. Things are moving at a very rapid rate. Even some information on the internet will say you can't take it. It's still worth reaching out to the consulate and be like, hey, can I take this? There was no information for Colombia. Even when I spoke to the consulate, they were like, look, we don't actually have any legal framework for entering the country with medical cannabis. And then I just had a letter from them being like, look, Julian's reached out to us, rah, rah, rah. And that was enough.
Fantastic. I think that actually gives a lot of hope. I think I'm a bit of a natural pessimist when it comes to that. And I've heard some horror stories and I've heard people even particularly having trouble. They go to New Zealand, no dramas, and then they come back to Australia and it's the Australian border force that are the problem. Like, oh, you could have just put New Zealand cannabis into here. It's like, dude, it's max 60 grams. I don't think we're really rocking the world with that problem.
Yeah, exactly.
What role do you think West Coast Palms will contribute to the next chapter? There's obviously this excitement about where things are going. What are you hoping your role and West Coast Palms' role in that will be?
All I can hope is West Coast Palms is one of the brands that helps pioneer this movement into the next chapter. I want, us to be at the forefront, whether it's with patient education or whether it's being an advocate for the adult use market. I'll find which space we fit in, but we're here for the long run. We're going to sustain whether it's medical or adult use, we'll be here.
Right on, right on. Well, Julian, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today. Hear the kind of joy and excitement and enthusiasm, the reality checks in what you've had to share. But despite the love for the long form conversation, we like to leave the listener with one key takeaway or dinner party fact. So we call this segment Poles of Wisdom. Julian, what is your pole of wisdom for the listener?
Geez, I guess I would say that, look, cannabis is more widely accepted around the world than you'd expect. There's a pretty fine line between recreational facing markets and medical facing markets. And I think you're going to see global markets mature at a rapid rate over the next few years. We're seeing more and more countries open up the legislation change and pave the way for production or medical markets. And we're even seeing, as I said, we're seeing more countries recognize cannabis as a medicine, allowing patients to bring it into the countries or fly around the world with it.
Well, Julian, I've seen your Canadian flower firsthand. In due time, I'll be seeing your Australian-grown cannabis via Golden Days. It's been an absolute delight to speak to you today, get to know you a little bit better, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes of West Coast Palms.
Thanks, man. It's been a delight to be on the air today.